you, as I always am. Such a pleasure to be here. It's Monday evening. It is freezing cold in New York City. I am very, very, very cold in New York City. It's not a snowstorm like it was yesterday and like it was last week, but it's still freezing cold. Had a lovely, lovely day at work, and I figured I would pop on and have a conversation with all of you. So welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I've got plenty of unnamed water beverage. And we're going to have a great conversation here. I'm going to make sure I see all the chats, right? That's an important thing to do. So be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. I understand some people are not getting notifications. Even if they've signed up to receive every notification, they don't get them, and that is obnoxious. So be sure to hit the notifications bell, mark to receive all notifications. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. People tell me they're being unsubscribed. YouTube, cut it out. What are you doing to me? What are you doing to me, YouTube? All right, and be sure to hit the like button. We're going to have a conversation. We're going to have one of our typical chats. Now, the way we're going to do things tonight is going to be a little bit interesting. I have my opening remarks for you. Yes, the situation in Ecuador. I can definitely talk to it. And I'm glad you got the CPI manual. So let me write down your super chat. All right. Ecuador situation. All right. So as the super chats come in, I'll write them down. I will answer the super chats in the second half of the program. The opening half of the program will be me answering. I will be answering, giving my opening remarks, not answering anything, just giving my opening remarks. That'll be the first half of the program. I will give my opening remarks. Then we'll do our roll call, and I'll call you out as I see you, names and locations. That'll be lots of fun. We'll get to find out who our audience is. And then from there, we can then do our super chats, and then we're done. That's basically the way we're going to do things tonight. So welcome. I'm really glad to be with you all in these lonely times. I don't think I went outside at all over the weekend. Not once did I go outside over the weekend. I was indoors all weekend, just me and my wife indoors. And so, if it wasn't for you all, I would be quite lonely. You all are very, very valuable to me. And so I want to thank you all for being a valuable community that we can engage with. I want to thank you all. You all are very, very valuable to me, and we are valuable to each other. We are a network of people. Before I jump into my opening remarks, I did want to mention that the Center for Political Innovation Educational Manual is now available. The CPI manual is now available. We Are City Builders, a book that is basically designed to conduct, political Marxist education, has been published. It's got a study guide in it. It's got selections from Lenin, from Marx, from Mao. It's available, so you can get a copy of it. It is available, so the link is down below. There is a link to where you can get a copy of it, so check it out. And that's a good development. I want to thank everyone who helped me put it together. Robert, Eve, Charlotte, Michael, who else? Lily, who else should I thank? Ramiro, everyone who helped out. Denise, everyone who helped out putting it together. I really appreciate it. I want to make sure I'm not forgetting anyone. Is there anyone I'm forgetting? It was really helpful. It was really, really helpful. So thank you. And it's a great achievement for our community to have this out there. Now you can conduct a reading group or a Marxist educational class with just a few of your friends. So it's linked below. There you go. For those of you who may be just joining us, we always request, if you're able to, please tweet this out. Please post the link on Facebook. Please share it to a Facebook group. Please put this on Reddit. We need Reddit support. Please put this on Twitter. The more people who watch, the better. And then, I guess with no further ado, I'll jump into my opening remarks for this evening. Folks, I didn't watch the Super Bowl. I will confess I did not watch the Super Bowl. Didn't watch the Super Bowl. There have been times in the past where I have watched the Super Bowl. This was not one of those times. I did not watch the Super Bowl. I did stream for the patrons around 9 o'clock last night. I think the Super Bowl was still going at that point, but yeah, didn't watch the Super Bowl, and didn't watch the Super Bowl halftime show. Did read afterwards that the Super Bowl halftime show, it featured Bruce Springsteen and his call for reunifying the country. On top of that, let me add that I did see trending on social media that the Church of Scientology, they had an advertisement. They actually had an advertisement that appeared on the Super Bowl. And that, of course, generated a huge amount of controversy. They have been widely criticized. There was a TV show with Leah Remini where she was talking about them, and there's been a huge amount of criticism of the Church of Scientology lately. Meanwhile, at the same time, the United States is in a crisis. The United States is in a complete and utter crisis. I mean, people are desperate. The economy has just been devastated, and it's not just by the pandemic. The lead up to the pandemic set the stage for all of this. Low wage, short-term service sector jobs, communities that don't have paved roads in them, don't have water that's properly purified. So much suffering going on. And it forces us all to have a conversation about liberalism and illiberalism, right? In academia for the past 4 years, really since Trump got elected, there has been a conversation about illiberalism, right? And basically mainstream political science is warning everyone that illiberalism is on the rise. What is illiberalism? Illiberalism is one of those words that does not really have a meaning. It's just a negative, right? What is an atheist? It's one without theism. It's one who does not believe in God. Atheism itself is not a thing. It is the absence of a thing, right? There is no religion called atheism. There is theism, which is the belief in a God, a deity, and there is atheism, being without such a thing. Illiberalism is simply a rejection of liberalism. And so if we're going to discuss the rise of illiberalism in the world and how that relates to the Super Bowl ad for the Church of Scientology, which I will get to, we're going to have to define what liberalism is. And there's a lot of, in the United States, the way people generally describe politics, there are liberals and there are conservatives. Democrats are liberals. Conservatives are Republicans. And that is politics, right? And anything left-wing we think of as being liberal. And if someone is a communist, they are an ultra-liberal. And if someone is a fascist or a Nazi, they are an ultra-conservative. This is a very, 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 very primitive understanding of politics. This is cable news stuff. This is Fox and MSNBC and CNN. It is so much more complicated than that. And if you're going to understand what liberalism actually is, and why we're seeing a rise of what you can call illiberalism, you're going to have to get beyond these Fox News, Chris Matthews, Sean Hannity, Tucker Carlson definitions of things. What is liberalism? Liberalism is a school of thought that comes out of the European period known as the Enlightenment. Liberalism is the belief in the individual. That's really what liberalism is. Liberalism is the belief in the individual and the rejection of society and their ability to control the individual. That's all that liberalism is. Liberalism is life, liberty, and property, John Locke. Liberalism is liberté, égalité, fraternité in the French Revolution. Liberalism is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and Thomas Jefferson. That's what liberalism is. Liberalism is a school of thought that originated with the capitalist revolutions to overturn feudalism. As the capitalists of Europe were overthrowing the nobles and kings, they were uprooting the system of feudalism, they replaced the mystical beliefs of the Roman Catholic Church and the feudal order with liberalism, which was the idea of quote-unquote individual rights. And Karl Marx spent a huge amount of time in the Communist Manifesto writing about liberalism. If and when a new global economic order is established by China, will Western capitalists willingly subjugate themselves? All right. To China. And Marx wrote a lot about liberalism. In fact, the first section of the Communist Manifesto, the bourgeois and proletarians, that section, is all about liberalism, how it strips from its halo every profession held upon with reverent awe, reduces the priest and the poet and the man of science to page laborers, right? It creates no nexus remaining between man and man, but but naked self-interest and callous cash payment, right? It forces the world on pains of extinction to become bourgeois themselves and to create the world in its own image. And he talks about how the bourgeoisie and capitalism played the most revolutionary role. And all throughout the feudal world, in the feudal system, where you have landowners, people who own land, and you have serfs, people who work on the land and are considered kind of semi-slaves of the landowners. They have their little tract and they work it and they pay their taxes to the landlord, and they get to keep what's left over, and they're not allowed to really leave. That in order to hold that system up, there were a whole lot of very, very hierarchical rules that had been established. There was the Roman Catholic Church, and if you spoke against the Roman Catholic Church, that was called heresy, and you got burned at the stake. You weren't allowed to disagree with the Roman Catholic Church, or else you were burned at the stake. Right? One was required to say and believe what the Roman Catholic order said in order to keep the feudal system intact. And the peasantry and the serfs were exploited brutally by the landowners, and there was no real progress that was allowed. There were some skilled trades. You had blacksmiths. You had people that did different things like weaving clothes and things like that. There were certain skilled trades, but overall, the overwhelming majority of society was either a peasant or a landowner. You had soldiers who kept everyone in line. You had a state that worked for the landowners to keep people in line. You had a king who was above the landowners and kind of, kept the landowners in line and was above them. And that was how society worked. And there were all kinds of elaborate mystical rituals established in order to keep this very, very hierarchical system intact. And thank you, Constantine. For example, we talk about thee and thou. And you and me, thy and thee, you and me, that there were different ways of addressing people. If you spoke to somebody in the feudal order who was higher than you couldn't use the same words, right? They might refer to you as thee, but you could refer to them as you, right? I mean, there were all these really, really authoritarian rules just about how people could interact with each other. You talk about bowing, right? You talk about, groveling, there was all these elaborate rules to keep a very, very elaborate hierarchical system intact. That was feudalism. And capitalism, as Karl Marx talks about in his Communist Manifesto, ripped it to shreds, and rightly so, absolutely rightly so. The peasants had no rights. The peasants were brutally exploited, and feudalism was holding back technology, right? The guilds, the way the guilds were set up, the blacksmith could not improve the way he made his metal. It was against the rules. They were all, the way the guilds were set up in feudalism, no historical progress was allowed. And so ripping apart feudalism and allowing factory owners to create factories and allowing, international trade and allowing, banks to be established and allowing, cities to spring up. And this was all historically necessary. It was a good thing that feudalism was ripped apart by capitalism. If we had remained in feudalism, we would never have raised the productive forces. The human life expectancy would still be very, very low. There wouldn't be all the great inventions that we have. There wouldn't be human progress, right? That ripping up feudalism, breaking apart feudalism was historically necessary, and it was a good thing to do. And in order to rip it up, you needed liberalism, right? In feudalism, the understanding is that you have no right to yourself. You fit into this very, very complicated social hierarchy. You have no human rights. If you got up in a feudal society and said, well, I disagree with the Catholic Church because of my human right to freedom of religion, they would have said, you are completely insane. Fascism definition. They would have said, you don't have the freedom of religion, and they would have burned you at the stake. You didn't have the right to freedom of religion. You didn't have the right to freedom of speech. You didn't have the right to live your life the way you wanted to. You didn't have the right to make your own decisions. Everyone was assigned a place by society, and you had to fulfill that. Historical progress was not allowed. Technological innovation was pretty much not allowed. Social mobility was certainly not allowed. Everyone was assigned a place at birth. They did what they were supposed to do. They thought what they were supposed to think, and that was that. Now, every so often, every 100 years or so, there would be uprisings in feudalism. This is something a lot of people don't realize, especially a lot of the far right-wing folks who like to glorify feudalism. They pretend that everyone was just always happy with it. I have not read that book. They always pretend that everyone was just totally happy with feudalism. That's not the case. There were uprisings very frequently against feudalism. In fact, there was almost a cycle in feudalism, that every 100 years or so, the peasants would rise up and revolt against feudalism. There was Thomas Munzer and the Peasant Wars of Germany. In China, they had the Taiping Uprising. And usually these revolts had an oddly religious and oddly apocalyptic character. In Europe, they referred to the cycle as millenarianism. And that around every 100 years or so, people would think that the world was coming to an end. Peasants would start whipping and flogging themselves. They would start thinking that they were going to build God's kingdom on earth. They would rise up and kill the landlords. There would be ugly civil wars between the peasants rising up and killing the landlords and the feudal order trying to restore things. And after the millenarian period was over, feudalism would be restored. And this was a natural cycle. You would have peasant uprisings happening throughout feudalism. And in China, they had feudalism for thousands of years, and it was considered part of the cycle that every little while, every 100 years or so, there would be a big, huge peasant uprising. And it usually had some kind of weird, apocalyptic, end-of-the-world religious character. There was usually an element of weird masochism where people are flogging and whipping themselves. There's usually some kind of messianic figure leading it. And a bunch of people get killed, and then it's all over, right? And this happened in Germany, and this happened in Britain, and this happened in France. Everyone wasn't happy under feudalism. And every so often, there would be a social explosion under feudalism, but it wouldn't go anywhere. Eventually, feudalism would be restored, and everything would go back to the normal of feudalism. That is, until there was enough of a technological breakthrough to change that. It was when Marco Polo and the Silk Road started bringing in new products, and technology. It was when a new class of merchants, they were neither peasants nor landlords, they were mercantile capitalists. They traveled from land to land selling things. It wasn't until there was a material basis that you could really bring down feudalism. Until then, these revolts were just kind of considered part of the built-in natural cycle of feudal society. Anyway, So liberalism is the ideology that tore apart feudalism, the rights of man. And nowadays, we live in a world, at least in the West, in Britain, the United States, Western Europe, liberalism is the ruling ideology. And there are three forms of liberalism. First, there is economic liberalism. This is where the term neoliberalism comes in. They call it market liberalism. And this is the idea that the economy should be left to its own devices. The government should not run the economy. Under feudalism, the idea was the government, the king ordered, you to build a bridge, you built the bridge. The king ordered you to grow corn, you grew corn. Well, market liberalism says the owners of property, the capitalists, can do whatever they want. They can do whatever they want. They can make profits. And a whole ideology has been developed around this, right? You talk about classical liberalism and economy. You talk about neoliberalism and Milton Friedman. It's the idea that hey, government should not be involved. There should not be any coercion upon the economy. The state has no right, recent reforms in Cuba, the state has no right, to interfere with the market, right? That it is up to every individual capitalist how he wants to run his property. He has private property rights, right? That those oil wells that he owns are his private property. So the government cannot tell him how much oil to extract or how much oil to sell because it is his private property. Furthermore, that factory where the capitalist hires a bunch of workers, that is his private property. And the government doesn't have the right to tell him how much he can pay his workers or how he should treat them, because that's his private property. Hands off. This is economic liberalism. Then you have what's called social liberalism. And I agree, pretty much with social liberalism. Social liberalism is the idea that you can live your life however you want to live your own life, so long as you don't violate the rights of somebody else, right? The old feudal society, everyone was obligated to get married by a certain age, obligated to have children, well, not the case anymore, right? Now, you want to get married? You don't want to get married. That's fine, right? You are gay or lesbian, that's your business, right? That your life is your business, Social liberalism goes a little bit further. It says if you want to use drugs, that's your business, not the government's business, right? I agree with that. I don't think people should be thrown in jail for using drugs, right? You want to use drugs, that's your business. You want to get married, there's no compulsion for you to live your life in a social way according to anybody else. It's up to you how to live your life. That's social liberalism. Now, let me add that in the last 50, 60 years, we've seen the rise of what you can call ideological liberalism. Ideological liberalism. And ideological liberalism says that there is no overarching truth. Now, this is interesting, right? So far, economic liberalism is the government can't interfere with the economy. Social liberalism is no one can interfere with your life. You can live your life the way you want. Ideological liberalism goes a little bit further. It says nobody should tell you what's true and what's not. Ideological liberalism goes further and it says no one should give you ideology. Ideology is bad. That is what philosophical liberalism says, that every order that has ever existed, feudalism, slave societies, has had an ideological narrative, right? In feudalism, they had the Roman Catholic Church telling you all about, if you're good, you go to heaven. If you're bad, you go to hell. Jesus died on the cross for your sin. Well, get rid of that, right? Communist societies are considered to be illiberal. They tell you that we're the working class, we're fighting, for the proletariat. No, got to get rid of that. Philosophical liberalism says that any attempt to give you a narrative about who you are, any attempt to explain human history with a grand narrative, that's totalitarianism. You're not allowed You're not allowed to give people a narrative about who they are. You're not allowed to tell people where they're going. Everyone should be told that there is no definite truth. That truth is in the eye of the beholder. There are competing narratives out there, and that if someone comes along and tries to tell you that there's a truth, they are totalitarian. So postmodernism is philosophical liberalism. So we have three manifestations of liberalism. We have economic liberalism, we have social liberalism, and we have philosophical liberalism. And basically, all three of them boil down to this: individualism above all else. Your individualism, your ability to not have anyone tell you anything, your ability to be completely unmessed with, your ability and the need for you to be an atomized individual, doing your own thing, that comes above everything else. Everything else. That your individual rights, the individual right of the economic activity of the people to do whatever they want, the social right of people to do whatever they want in terms of how they live their lives, and the belief that no one should try to impose on you beliefs about how you should live your life, that takes priority. And we live right now amid the collapse of liberalism. Liberalism as an ideology is completely failing. Why? Human nature. Isn't that funny, right? Usually those defenders of capitalism is the one throwing human nature in our faces. Well, I'm going to say human nature. Human beings have always been collective creatures. Human beings have always been collective creatures. I wrote it down. We've always been collective creatures. Human beings, for the majority of our existence as a species, we were hunter-gatherers. We lived in tribes. All of human history has been a history of human beings working together collectively. Whenever human beings have existed, they've always been in groups with other human beings, families, tribes, communities, neighborhoods, countries. And these groups tend to develop beliefs. Right? They tend to believe things together as a group, and those beliefs tend to be based on their shared experience. And around these beliefs that communities and collectives develop, they tend to come up with a list of rules. And those rules tend to be social rules, and they tend to be economic rules. And as humans create and exchange goods and services, certain economic rules are developed. As humans, live their lives, get married, have children, etc., certain social rules are developed. Those social rules and economic rules are based on philosophical rules. And human existence for the entire history of humanity has been illiberalism. No one talked about liberalism at all until about the 1400s in Europe. Never had the economic level been reached to facilitate a liberal society. And liberalism was great when it got rid of the feudal commons and the feudal estates and medieval authority. Feudalism was an oppressive system, and liberalism was good. It ripped it apart. But now we live in a time where liberalism has become unhinged. And if we look at what's happening in the Western world, and people don't have health care, the roads aren't paved, the water is not properly purified, people don't have jobs, people are hungry, poverty amidst plenty. There are all kinds of big problems created by liberalism. The pandemic is in and of itself a complete repudiation of liberalism. There is not a solution to this pandemic, to COVID-19, that can be resolved within the framework of liberalism. You are not on your own with COVID-19. You are not on your own with COVID-19. If the government had said, you know what, COVID-19, you get it, you don't get it, that's your problem, wouldn't work. The death count would be even higher than it already is. COVID-19 was a society-wide problem, and COVID-19 is a problem that requires a society-wide solution. The way we handle healthcare in the United States is you're on your own. Right? You go buy insurance, you get insurance from your employer, you don't. That's all. That's your problem. Right? Why? I mean, remember Bill O'Reilly? He said on his program, he was angry about Obamacare. Right? Well, what if fat people eat lots of fattening foods and then my taxes go up? I don't want to have to deal with anyone else's health. Our attitude in the United States when it comes to healthcare is you're on your own. It's between you and your doctor. Right? Healthcare, the state has no obligation to give you healthcare. The state has no obligation to give you healthcare. And you have no obligation to pay taxes to the state to make sure that everyone can have health care. If you want health care, go out and get it yourself. And that's between bootstraps, as Kinky is putting it in the chat. That's our attitude about health care in the United States, right? Well, what we've learned from this pandemic is that the health of one is the health of all. The health of one is the health of all. Society has to come together to deal with COVID-19. It's a collective problem, and you have to have a collective solution. The same goes for natural disasters. Right? Look at Hurricane Katrina, how so many people were left behind. Collective problems that affect all of society require collective solutions. And if you look at other countries around the world that have developed more collective societies, China, Vietnam, Cuba, Venezuela, societies that have gotten rid of economic liberalism. They have an economy where the banks, factories, and industries are organized to serve public good and not profits. They've adopted a socialist system. Why? They've been able to respond and handle the COVID-19 pandemic more effectively. Far lower death rates. Why? Because they don't have the attitude that everyone's on their own. They don't have the attitude that, hey, it's your problem. They don't have the attitude that the individual above all else. They have a collectivist notion. And there are countries that are not socialist, mind you, that just kind of have more of a collectivist mentality that have been able to handle the pandemic much more effectively. So what in the world does this have to do? What in the world does this have to do with the Super Bowl advertisement for Scientology? Well, here's the thing. Scientology is an illiberal institution. Right? I'm not defending the Church of Scientology. I'm definitely not a Scientologist. I know they've hurt a lot of people. I've seen the same documentaries that you all have seen. I'm not a defender of the Church of Scientology whatsoever. But they are an illiberal institution. They are definitely an illiberal institution. They give their members a narrative about good and evil. They tell them right and wrong. They organize their resources in the interests of the Church of Scientology, namely the interests of the bureaucracy at the top of it. They're an illiberal institution. And they ran an ad on the Super Bowl. If you watch the advertisements, they're trying to appeal to how much people are suffering right now. And the advertisement was meant to, if you watch it, it was meant to appeal to people's desire to have help, their desire to be connected to a community. That was what the aim of the advertisement was. It was to try and reach people. And Donald Trump, many people noticed that his rhetoric and his appeal was illiberal. His policies were not illiberal. You know, as president, he very much was all about free markets. He was economically liberal. And he was pretty socially liberal too. I mean, aside from his anti-immigrant stuff and maybe some of the xenophobia against Muslims, he governed in a pretty socially liberal way too. But his appeal, the demagogic appeal that Donald Trump made, was an illiberal appeal. He appealed to people, America first, we never lose, we always win. There was very much a demagogic, illiberal appeal to Donald Trump, that he was going to be a strong leader who was going to mobilize the population to solve the crisis. When liberalism is crashing and burning, as it is now, mainly for economic reasons, illiberal trends are going to become popular. And this is what happens in a crisis of capitalism. All of society realizes we need some dramatic action to resolve the crisis. That becomes a widespread understanding. We need dramatic solutions. And you're on your own, buddy. Sink or swim. Every atomized individual for themselves, that is not going to resolve it. And human beings, in our DNA, we do have a collectivist impulse. When we are suffering, we tend to get together in groups of other people to try and find a way out of the crisis. As we face hostile circumstances, we tend to become more and more illiberal. Illiberalism tends to rise in the face of hostile conditions. When people are suffering, they come together, they pull together to have a solution. That's just how human beings work. And right now, the United States is facing a big, big problem. It's facing very hostile circumstances. There are hungry people out there. There's instability in society. There's a pandemic. There's a lot of insecurity. So, naturally, people are going to be drawn to some or other form of illiberalism. That's just going to be the natural reality. The ruling class knows this. The whole ruling class knows this. When you have society-wide problems, when people are under siege, when people are suffering, they tend to become more and more illiberal. Yeah, when things are going well, people want to do their own thing. When things are not going well, when people are suffering and desperate, they tend to pull together and become pretty illiberal. So now we're entering this weird period where liberalism, in order to protect itself from illiberalism, is becoming illiberal. We have liberal illiberalism. It sounds like an oxymoron. It's crazy, right? According to liberalism, there should not be any censorship on YouTube. Why? You can say whatever you want. Free marketplace of ideas. Except the liberal order that insists that free marketplace of ideas is the solution has decided that in order to make sure that no one comes along to threaten the free marketplace of ideas, we need to suppress ideas that might lead to people believing you should suppress ideas. Do you see how weird this is getting? The liberal order says we can't have totalitarianism out there because that suppresses individuals. So if there's an individual who believes in totalitarianism, we need to suppress them in order to make sure that no one is going around saying we have to suppress people. Do you see how silly this is starting to get? Do you see how weird this is starting to get? No, this is, in fact, now they're having full mobilizations of society to train people, to make sure that everyone is thinking on the same page, make sure everyone's thinking alike, to make sure no one believes in a system that says people should all think alike. You know this? There are talk in Britain and in other places, they want school curriculum to teach you what websites to look at and what websites to not look at. Did you know this? They're going to train school kids in school to only trust mainstream American media because non-American media or non-mainstream media might lead you to illiberal conclusions. So we're going to brainwash children not to look at websites that might make them think that you should brainwash children. liberalism is starting to turn into a dog chasing its own tail. It's getting really, really weird, right? With the tech censorship. Again, according to liberalism, there shouldn't be any tech censorship. But the liberals insist that tech censorship is necessary to protect liberalism. Is this making your head spin yet? Right? We're living in a period, and they all acknowledge this. Every article about the rise of illiberalism in the world acknowledges that we are living in a period where people are becoming desperate, and out of their desperation, they're getting closer together, and they're becoming more and more illiberal. And so the liberal articles in the New York Times and, all these liberal publications, Wall Street Journal, you name it, they're all talking about, because people are going to become illiberal, we need to put up barriers to make sure that people don't get information that will encourage them to become more illiberal. This is the kind of thing that should make your head want to just explode. Liberalism is supposed to believe that there should be no barriers. You should be able to think whatever you want. You should be able to read whatever you want to read. And the reason illiberals are bad, in theory, is because they might set up a society where you can't read whatever you want. You can't think whatever you want, and you can't do whatever you want economically. So we've got to make sure there are barriers to keep you from thinking illiberal thoughts so that the illiberals don't gain any strength and violate your freedom to think. This is crazy. Look, I read you all like 2 years ago now. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal by a very well-respected political science professor. And he started speaking about this trend of what he called democratic regression. He started saying that around the world there is democratic regression, right? That after the fall of the Soviet Union in the 1990s, democracy was on the march. Not just in the Eastern Bloc, all those countries in the Eastern Bloc were becoming democratic, but also, Pinochet was out of power in Chile, and dictators were stepping down like Marcos, and the whole world, democracy was on the march. But now, it says, we're living in the age of illiberalism. And because of that, democracy is regressing around the world. And what two examples did he give of democratic regression? Putin in Russia, and Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. And he said that both of those leaders were elected by the people, legitimately. The majority of the Venezuelans wanted Hugo Chavez. The majority of Russians wanted Vladimir Putin. But these societies were, according to this article in the Wall Street Journal, they were no longer democratic. They had regressed from democracy. And why did they regress from democracy, according to the Wall Street Journal? Well, after Vladimir Putin got elected, he proceeded to use his power as president to change the economy of Russia, and to change the military of Russia, and to change the policing agencies of Russia, and to change the media of Russia. So therefore, he tampered with these independent institutions, and so it was no longer democratic. They said the same thing about Hugo Chavez. Sure, the majority of people voted for Hugo Chavez, but once Hugo Chavez got into office, he changed the nature of the Venezuelan economy. He tampered with the independent institutions in the economy. He tampered with the independent institutions of the military. He tampered with the independent institutions of the policing agencies. He tampered with the independent institutions of the media. So therefore, Hugo Chavez got elected, and even though he was elected, because he tampered with these independent institutions, all of a sudden, Venezuela was no longer democratic, according to the Wall Street Journal. But here's the thing. These institutions in Russia or in Venezuela that were independent beforehand were serving the oligarchy, right? In the time of Boris Yeltsin, Russia's economy was being looted left and right by British corporations and British banks and American corporations. It wasn't independent. It was serving the de facto rulers of Western capitalism. Putin got in there and he put Gazprom and Rosneft at the center of the economy. He asserted state control over the economy. So then it was no longer independent. You see, it comes from the assumption that all the institutions of society should just naturally serve the rulers of Western capitalism, right? Venezuela's state-run oil company. It was technically state-run, but everyone knew it was just a middleman for Wall Street corporations. Well, 2003, Chavez has been president for a few years. He changes the nature of the Venezuelan oil company. He changes it so the money goes into the public budget. And when he does that, it's no longer independent. It suddenly is serving the Venezuelan people. It's supposed to naturally, the oil company of Venezuela is just supposed to naturally serve Western corporations. It's independent when it serves Western corporations. When it doesn't, then it's no longer independent, and that's democratic regression, right? He changed the nature of the military. Hugo Chavez got in there, he changed the nature of the military. He said that, we're going to train our military in Cuba. We're going to have Marxism be part of the education of the military. Oh, no, you can't do that. Now it's no longer independent. Before, when they were being spoon-fed Western ideology, when they were getting trained in the United States, that was just independence. Are you starting to see how weird this is all getting? That liberalism is on the defensive. Liberalism is on the defensive. Liberalism knows that it's created a mess in the Western world, that it can't resolve the economic problems. It can't even resolve the social problems. It certainly can't resolve the ideological problems. Right? People need the economy to be rationally controlled. They need socialism. They can't have the anarchy of production. They can't have the chaos of the market continue. Furthermore, people need to know who they are. People need a community to identify with. They need a group to feel that they're part of. They need a family. They need a collective. It's an essential part of the human identity, is knowing who you are. And people need something to believe in. They need to know what they're fighting for in life. They need to be able to determine what is right and what is wrong and by what principles they want to live. Economic liberalism has failed. Social liberalism, to some extent, has failed. Ideological liberalism has absolutely failed. We've got an economic catastrophe in the United States. We've got a social catastrophe in the United States. We've got an ideological catastrophe in the United States. People don't have jobs. People are hungry. People don't know who they are and are committing suicide and getting addicted to drugs. It is impossible for the state to really mobilize any enthusiasm from the people because we're not on the same page anymore as a society. Liberalism is completely failing. It is crashing and burning right now. And so the inevitability that's coming out of this is that illiberalism will triumph. Illiberalism is going to triumph. That is just the reality. Illiberalism is going to triumph. However, the question is, what kind of illiberalism will it be? Right now, they're trying to enact some kind of weird liberal illiberalism, where in order to protect liberalism, we silence anyone who's not a liberal. That's not exactly going to work. Fascism is a form of illiberalism. It is. Fascism is definitely a form of illiberalism. Bonapartist, state authoritarianism, social engineering, all these things are illiberal to some degree or other. But socialism and Marxism is also a form of illiberalism. There are many forms of illiberalism. But the inevitable reality of the course that we are on as a society is that some form of illiberalism is going to triumph. And as I watched that ad on the Scientology advertisement that was on the Super Bowl, and I read all the outrage, all the people calling for that advertisement to be banned because the Church of Scientology is illiberal, which it is, I smiled to myself. I just had to smile to myself. Because at the end of the day, some kind of illiberal order is going to emerge from the chaos spurned by Western liberalism. The question is, what kind of order is it going to be? That's the question. And that's why I'm on here, working so hard to educate people about Marxism and socialism. That's why I'm on here trying to explain to people why We need to get to a better world. Why dialectical and historical materialism work. And that's why I'm not sitting on here just defending the liberal order from the right-wing opposition. Because the liberal order is going to break. That's pretty much inevitable at this point. There's not a solution to the problems we're facing in the West within the liberal order. The liberal order is going to break. The question is, what replaces the liberal order? I think that what we need is a socialist society, where the banks, factories, and industries, the major centers of economic power, are organized to serve public good. I think the working class, on behalf of all of society, should seize control of the means of production. And I think that growth should be unlimited. I think human reason and rational thinking should be put at the center of the economy. And with human reason, not the anarchy of production dictating what goes on, the wealth of society can greatly expand. We can raise millions from poverty. We can build infrastructure. We can create a situation where everyone has jobs and housing and education. We can move toward a society where no one is exploiting anyone else. We can start to deconstruct all forms of social hierarchy. We can create a world, ultimately, on the basis of each according to their own ability, each according to their needs. But in order to do that, we need to come to the conclusion that the foundation of the problems is economic. Right? Other forms of illiberalism are going to say the foundations of the problem are psychological. They're going to say the foundations of the problem are spiritual. Well, there are spiritual problems. There are psychological problems. But as a materialist, I maintain that those psychological and spiritual problems are the result of economic problems. The economic base is the cause of the crisis we are in. And in order to eradicate and liquidate the crisis, we must liquidate the economic base. We must abolish capitalism if we are going to resolve the crisis of liberalism. And that's all there is to it. And that's why I put out the City Builders and Vandals book. That's why we got the new textbook, We Are City Builders. That's basically, we must abolish the economic base. We must liquidate the economic base of the crisis of liberalism. That's what needs to be done in our time. So those are my opening remarks. All right, I'm just going to write down these super chats here. Okay, all right. Common A, post-U.S. world, and U.S. cities, one, Cuban. All right, very good. So there you go. Remember when they started calling liberalism progressives? All right, yeah, that's funny, right? Progressivism versus liberalism. We'll talk about that, Kinky, and thank you. All right, folks, why don't we do our roll call, names and locations, and I'll call you out as I see you. Names and locations, and then we'll go into the super chat questions. Sound good? Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. Kendall in San Diego, Cleveland Pirate Alex, Henderson, Nevada, John in Houston. It's everywhere. Very good. Very, very good. Who else is with us tonight? Montreal, Belize, Kentucky, Mississippi, JT24, Alabama, New York, Albany, New York, sorry, Larry Chavista. Boston, St. Bermuda's, Australia, Adelaide, Kieran from San Diego, Sam in the UK, David in China, Chris, Baldwin Park, California, Queens, New York City, Springfield, Missouri, Australia, The Woodlands, Canada, West Palm Beach, State College, Pennsylvania, Andre in Virginia, Charlie in Ottawa, League of Young Communists in California, Kathmandu, Auckland, New Zealand, Missouri, Portugal, Julian from Texas, Australia, Tristan in Maryland. Brilliant opening remarks. Thank you, Kinky. Gabriella in New Jersey, San Francisco, Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati, Ohio, West Palm Beach, West Texas, Philly and San Diego, Michigan, Jersey City, Dan Uko, New Jersey, Pomona, California, Don in Iowa, Chris in Salt Lake City. Hey, Caleb from Lombard, Italy. Hey, Andre, how you doing? CJ in Florida, West Palm Beach. David from Portugal, Northern Lower Michigan. Vladivostok, out in the east over there, right? Mo in Toronto, Canada. Daniel in Los Angeles. Anastasia from England, London, UK. East Liverpool, Northern Macedonia. Bay Ridge, Riverside, California. Michael in Ithaca, New York. Patty here in California's Great Mojave Desert. Caracas, Venezuela. Melbourne. Big Al in Chichester, New York. Clarksville, Tennessee. Vladimir in Stalinkov. Sao Paulo, Brazil. Suffolk County, New York. Lombard, Italy. Patrick from Los Angeles, now in Texas. Vladimir Mohsen from Iran. Hamilton, Canada. Welcome, welcome. Toronto, Ontario. Ben Redward. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Anybody else? Anyone else with us here tonight? Anyone else with us tonight for this lovely conversation? So glad I have you all to engage with. Brisbane, Australia. Welcome, 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 welcome. Welcome, welcome. Folks, I went to the gym today. It was refreshing. I did some weights. I did some time on the elliptical machine. When I was working out for the first time, when I was doing everyday workouts for the first time, where I was making a point of going at least 5 times a week, Wilmington, Delaware, Antarctica, Riverside, California, I started using the treadmill, and I just would get these pains in my knees. They were just painful in my knees. So I switched to the elliptical machine. It's much better to work out on the elliptical machine. So yeah, I was on the elliptical machine. I did some weights. I did some of the weight machines, and I'm getting stronger, and that's good. And working out, it's a very good thing to do, right? So now I have a third place I can go. In addition to work and home, I have the gym. Now they're saying that Friday restaurants open up in New York City. Can you believe that? Friday they will open restaurants in New York City. I am in utter disbelief. I really hope that is true, and I hope they stay open after that. With the COVID scare, the COVID numbers are going down. So my hope is that is correct. So I know I've got 8 super chats to get through here, but if you have another question, we got to go get coffee, Caleb. Yes, absolutely we do. I've got 8 super chats here, but let's go through them all. We got more things you want me to talk about. I will talk about them. That's why I'm here. Shoot me a super chat. Confused Cuba's cities look stuck in time and run down U.S. sanctions. All right, Cuba stuck in time. All righty. Okay, all right, so let's start with Ecuador, the situation. Big victory there. The socialists are back into power. In Ecuador, what happened, I was in Ecuador when I was 12 years old in 1999, and they had a crisis of market liberalism. The economy was running rampant. The IMF and the World Bank had forced them to give up their own currency, privatize things, cut out agricultural subsidies, and that combined with El Nino, remember El Nino, this climate effect, combined with the collapse in the Asian markets, in 1999 there was an economic depression that hit Ecuador. Hundreds of thousands of people died. People fled the country in big numbers. It was a devastation. I was there when I was 12 years old, and neoliberalism had just completely wrecked the country. I saw starving, desperate, poor people everywhere in Ecuador in the late 90s when I was there. Then I went back to Ecuador in 2013. Between 1999 and 2013, you had the election of Rafael Correa. Rafael Correa was a socialist, a Bolivarian who fought for the people, and he was in coalition with the Communist Party. He had his own, political party, and together they won. The election was basically a referendum on free market neoliberal economic policies. Rafael Correa won the election, and he got elected, and he proceeded to assert government control over natural resources. He started partnering up with the state-run economy of China. They built new roads in the country. They built railroads. They built new water systems. They wiped out illiteracy. They did amazing things. And I went back to Ecuador in 2013 for the World Festival of Youth and Students, and what I saw was a completely different country. Socialism had completely reinvented Ecuador. Ecuador was suddenly a much more stable country, a lot less poverty. It was amazing. Now, Correa was very popular. You'll remember that Rafael Correa was a big supporter of Julian Assange, gave Julian Assange refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. Well, Correa was replaced with Lenin Moreno. And Lenin Moreno talked like he was a socialist, like he was a leftist, but he got in there and he implemented free market reforms. Cashless society. He implemented free market reforms. He started privatizing things. It was a disaster. It was an absolute disaster. Just an absolute disaster. So now, ever since the pandemic has made the free market reforms of Lenin Moreno even less positive. The support that Lenin Moreno gave to the coup in Bolivia made Lenin Moreno even less popular. And now Lenin Moreno is out. And Aruz, the socialist, is that how you say it? Aruez? I don't want to, I'm going to butcher it. The socialist is back in. Rafael Correa's party is back in. Neoliberalism is out, and that seems to be the case. In Bolivia, after the coup, the coup plotters, this is a bad time to have a neoliberal coup. Right now, with the economy shut down in a pandemic, when people desperately need a social safety net, you can't have a situation where people are just left out to dry. We're having a global economic slowdown because of the pandemic. Now is not the time to have a neoliberal coup. If there is a worst possible time to have a neoliberal coup, to have neoliberal economic policies, that time is now, when people are desperate and really need it. So, Bolivia, the coup plotters, neoliberalism, out, right? And now Ecuador, neoliberalism, privatizations, out. Not a surprise. They said that the pink tide, they've called it, right, of socialists in Latin America, the pink tide is over. Remember that? The pink tide is over. Right? They've learned their lesson. Venezuela is so bad, they've learned their lesson. Never again will they try socialism. Wrong. The pink tide is not over. Look, all the negative publicity they gave to Venezuela, the country with the highest rate of GDP growth in all of South America, over and over again, year after year after year, was Bolivia under the leadership of Evo Morales. Evo Morales paved the roads of the country, wiped out illiteracy, was bringing in Chinese investment and utilizing the state-controlled oil and natural gas resources. They never reported on that. All of Venezuela's problems were supposed to be because of socialism, but socialist Bolivia was doing very, very well, but then we don't talk about that. It was just unbelievable. Pretty unbelievable. Venezuela has had its problems, namely because it is an oil-centered economy. They don't have much there other than oil. They don't have a lot of their own production. And the oil price drop of 2014 and then the crippling U.S. sanctions that don't allow them to import food has created a pretty big crisis in the country. Things have improved in the last couple years, but the final years of Obama in Venezuela were an absolute nightmare. And, because of that, there's been a huge demonization of socialism. They say socialism is the reason people in Venezuela were suffering. No, the issue was the oil price drop, and the issue was the sanctions that made it impossible and made it very difficult for food to be imported. So there you go. But Venezuela, because the Socialist Party, because Maduro and the communists have such a solid base of support, they were able to withstand the worst of it. And now Venezuela, things are improving. There's Iranian supermarkets that are opening up. The economy of Venezuela is once again expanding. So, the pink tide, as they call it, is not over. And we have seen the disaster of free market reforms in Argentina. We've seen the disaster of free market reforms in Chile. People are rising up and protesting. Go up to Haiti. Look at Haiti. Right? Cuba is supposed to be so bad. Look at Haiti. Look how capitalism is doing in Haiti, another island nation in the Caribbean. So, yeah, there you go. All right. Will the capitalists of the West be subjugated to China? It's not that simple. All right. The weakness of capitalism, and this is kind of gets to what I'm talking about, is the anarchy of the market. Let me repeat that. The weakness of capitalism is the anarchy of the market. Every capitalist does not have the same financial interest. Every capitalist does not have the same financial interest. Some capitalists think trading with China is going to make them lots of money. Other capitalists think China is a big competitor, right? Big oil companies want to trade with China because they want China to buy their oil. They don't want China to buy their oil from Russia. They want China to buy their oil from American oil companies. Meanwhile, steel manufacturers, steel corporations in the United States see China with its state-run steel industry that makes half the steel in the world as a competitor. And they want tariffs and they want to block China's economy. What have American Marxists historically said about liberalism and how to handle it? So there's divisions among the ruling class about this, about how do they deal with China. At the end of the day, I think that there will be some capitalists in the United States that will want to do business with China, and some capitalists that will want to completely go to war with China. And we'll see which ones win out. I ultimately think that we're entering a period where something is probably going to happen, which is that right now the way the economic fights, really the fights over economic policy in the United States are playing out are like this. The ultra-rich, they want more Bonapartism, they want more state control over the economy because of the fact that they are thinking long-term and they don't want a capitalist crisis. Meanwhile, the lower levels of capital have a more libertarian outlook. They want to deregulate everything. They think that things are rigged so the big corporations get the government contracts, and that's totally true. They have a more libertarian outlook. Pretty soon, however, I believe the fighting among the ruling class is going to become more intense, that the lower levels of capital are no longer going to want a free market policy. They're instead going to want a government that will fight for them. I think that right now the lower levels of capital, instead of wanting, they think that Jeff Bezos is a socialist, they think Jeff Rockefeller is a socialist, and they want free markets. The fighting is going to get more and more intense to the point that these lower levels of capital are no longer going to be wanting free markets. They're just going to want a government that will come in and kick Jeff Bezos' ass, is what they're going to want. Right now they want hands off, but I think we're going to get to the point that the lower levels of capital want instead a government that will kick Jeff Bezos' ass. Now, when that transition happens, that could potentially be a game changer, because then that will basically put the lower levels of American capital in an almost blatantly anti-imperialist position. Won't happen overnight. It might take a long time. The crisis has to really intensify. But if the lower levels of American capital were to get into an anti-imperialist position and start to think that China and Cuba and Venezuela and Russia are their allies, as Jeff Bezos wants to destroy them, just like it wants to destroy the lower levels of American capital, that could be the beginning of a revolutionary united front. A united front where there could be a united front between the working class of the United States and the lower levels of capital against the big bourgeoisie. Right now, unfortunately, the way American politics is lining up, the labor unions, the working class are aligning with the big bourgeoisie to suppress like an uprising of the lower levels of capital. And that's kind of a disastrous situation. But if the lower levels of capital were to realize that if they had the workers on their side against big capital, and some kind of united front, of the lower levels of the bourgeoisie and the working class against big capital, rather than the lower levels, of capital against the ultra-rich and against the working class, that could open the door to something quite exciting, right? And but we'll see. And nothing ever works out the way you think. And let's remember that that's not where we're in right now. Liberalism and social democracy strains liberalism, except, can you explain? Embedded liberalism and social democracy seems to strain liberalism except state role. I don't know what that means. Okay, giving lower levels of capital. Lower levels of capital. All right, no problem. And liberalism and social democracy embedded. All right, cool. All right. What is the definition of fascism? Fascism is a mass movement of violence and terror to hold back historical progress and resolve an economic crisis. When capitalism enters a crisis, there generally are two approaches to how to resolve it. One approach says we need socialism. We need to build people up. We need the banks, factories, and industries to be organized to serve public good and not profits. We need the workers to take control of the society, right? And we need to uplift the most oppressed. We need to uproot social hierarchies. We need to, organize the economy to serve all the people, etc. That's socialism. Fascism is that when there's a crisis of capitalism, they call for mass destruction and death and the reinforcing of social hierarchies and attempting to roll back history in order to resolve and liquidate the crisis. And it is a form of Bonapartism, just like, Bonapartist struggles generally give birth to the struggle for socialism. But it is a form of Bonapartism where a destructive wing that wants to roll back history and create and reinforce social hierarchies, glorifying the past, that they try to resolve the crisis with concentration camps and militarism. And, many people said that Hitler created an economic boom in Germany by putting half the working class in prison concentration camps and the other half in military uniforms. That's true, right? When Hitler came in, it was a Bonapartist maneuver, right? It was one section of the ruling class, namely the German industrial capitalists, Krupp and Tyson and Hollimer Schacht. They came in, they took control of the government, and they crushed the labor unions and put all the labor unions in prison. They created a whole, like a permanent, a permanent prison apparatus. So a section of the working class would always be working as slave labor. And on top of that, they militarized the economy. And that created an economic boom, but it was done with destruction. And by 1939, they had to have World War II because the German state would have collapsed if they hadn't, because the entire economy was centered around prisons and war. Right now, libertarians want to tell you Hitler was a socialist. That's not socialism, right? It was a capitalist economy with Bonapartist maneuvers beating down and destroying huge sections of the working class with a huge amount of government spending on the military. That's what it was. And that fascism is a mobilization of society and a form of Bonapartism based on destruction and holding back social progress and reinforcing social hierarchies. It's basically, okay, society is out of control. Let's start killing. Let's start locking people up. Let's start reinforcing medieval hierarchies and glorifying the past in the hopes of stabilizing society. The opposite of the Marxist solution to the crisis, which is let's have society rise up, let's continue historical progress, let's take control of the economy and reorganize it to serve public good. And that's the difference between Marxism and fascism. Marxism is a progressive and constructive response to the crisis. Fascism is a destructive and violent response to the crisis. And I will say that in the synthetic left, there is a whiff of fascism. Right? I'm not saying that makes them, there's the reality. A lot of the synthetic left do glorify the past. They do oppose historical progress. They do think that the solution, the way to resolve things in the United States is to beat down sections of the working class. So there is kind of a fascistic edge to a lot of the synthetic left. That is a reality. Now, obviously, the far right is far more fascistic in that they glorify existing social hierarchies far more, etc. But the synthetic left and the actual far right, they both have a fascistic edge in that neither of them embrace historical progress. Neither of them see the solution as humans marching forward. They both kind of have a rejection of economic growth, and they both hold on to this idea that we've gone too far. I think the way fascistic thinking manifests itself on the left is with Malthusianism and eco-Malthusianism, and with the love of chaos and the love of destruction. There is kind of an almost a sexualization of chaos and violence among some leftists, right? That they just get like an electric thrill from windows being broken and things being torn down, right? I mean, if something's being torn down, if something's being torn apart, if a window is being broken, if someone's getting punched or beaten up, it gives them this electric thrill. And that is that is fascist, right? Communists are not like that. Communists would prefer not that there not be any violence, right? And communists prefer a peaceful transition. But when people believe in chaos and violence for the sake of chaos and violence, and when people are envisioning a society before industry, and they're saying that there are too many people in the world, we need to reduce the human population, that is a fascistic edge, right? Now, obviously the far right that glorifies social hierarchy is talking about racism, that's talking about, patriarchy and women knowing their, obviously that's very fascist as well. So there's elements of fascism. There is elements of fascism being displayed by the synthetic left and being displayed by the actual far right now. But ultimately, Marxism is a progressive ideology. All right, Cuba's reforms. Well, look, Cuba needs to transition to be more like China or like Vietnam, and they have said this for years. They've been saying that they need to transition to be more like Vietnam and more like China, and they've talked about having market reforms. What has changed is that now, even though the U.S. sanctions are on them and such, and that some of Obama's lifting of sanctions has been rolled back by Trump, now there is a lot more to trade with in the anti-imperialist camp. Russia and China have gotten stronger. There's the whole Bolivarian bloc, and so that, there are market reforms taking place in Cuba, but Cuba remains a socialist country. The banks, factories, and industries of Cuba are organized to serve public good, not profits. The state very much controls the private capitalists. So there you go. Great reset. So there you go. Cultural Marxism. Well, look. Cultural Marxism is a phrase that is used by the far right wing in the United States. It's a phrase that they use, and it refers to not the economics of Marxism, but to mainly an academic current, Theodor Adorno, Susan Sontag, the Frankfurt School, and others, that they don't like. And they don't like them mainly because they deconstruct social hierarchies and because they deconstruct narratives. It refers to an academic current that right-wingers don't like. And like Jordan Peterson talks about postmodern neo-Marxism, and gambling addiction. All right. It's a thing on the right. What a lot of the right-wing analysis of cultural Marxism doesn't seem to understand is that cultural Marxism was fomented against actual Marxism. Postmodernism is not Marxism. Postmodernism says there is no narrative of human history. There is no truth, and any attempt to create one is naturally and inherently totalitarian. That's what postmodernism believes. Marxism is a narrative about human history, and it does assign right and wrong, and it does give people a purpose, right? History's challenge. So there is a huge difference between what these people call cultural Marxism and Marxism. Now, there's a Marxian influence on Adorno and the Frankfurt School, etc. Why? Because they used the deconstructive aspects of Marxism in order to push their ideas, right? Adorno, Derrida, Sontag, all of these people, they believe that deconstruction is in and of itself a good. And thank you, Matthew. I appreciate that, and I've never heard of that book. I'll have to check it out. But they believe in deconstruction. There is deconstruction in Marxism. Marxism deconstructs the mythology that the West is the best, right? That the Western capitalist countries are just better than the third world, and that's why they're in power. Marxism deconstructs the patriarchal order and explains that the family hasn't always been the way it is. The family changes according to economic situations. Marxism deconstructs, basically conservatives tend to believe, when you really get down to it, that there is eternal truth. Right? That there is an eternal nature of the family. There's an eternal nature of human beings, that humans always act the same way. Marxism goes through human history and says that as the economic base changes, society changes. For the majority of human history, there was no family. There were tribes, and everyone in the tribe was like one big family. They didn't even keep track of whose kid was whose kid, right? Well, fast forward to the origin of private property. You had the origin of the family, and originally the family was a man and however many women and children and slaves and whatever. And fast forward, we have, monogamy, one man, one woman. Now we have gay marriage. That as the economic base of society changes, the family unit changes. So Marxism is deconstructing the myth that many right-wingers believe that there is this one sacred family unit. Right? Well, it's deconstructive. Okay, that's very useful to Adorno and all of them who believe in deconstruction. Furthermore, Marxism deconstructs the idea that the capitalist system is great, and then deconstructs that. And Adorno and cultural Marxism, their belief is, and you shouldn't really call it Marxism. It's not Marxism. All right, but their belief is that deconstruction is in and of itself good. Okay. And so they will use deconstructive aspects of Marxism. But the second that Marxism starts saying, and will mobilize a mass movement of the workers to seize control of the means of production, they're like, oh, fascism. The second you say, and, there is truth, and the capitalists don't have truth, and we have truth, they go, oh, fascism, right? That Adorno, Sontag, Derrida, all of these people, right? They're not Marxists because Marxism is an ideology. Marxism does recognize eternal truths. So, Marxism believes in, the historical line of march of the proletariat. So they're not Marxists, okay? They are deconstructionists, they are postmodernists who utilize aspects of Marxism in their deconstruction. And the reason that this whole milieu that they like to call cultural Marxism was set up, it was originally created by the CIA, by the Congress for Cultural Freedom. You can Google this. The Congress for Cultural Freedom program, all kinds of CIA money trickled into these institutions. Der Monat magazine was set up in Germany. Partisan Review magazine was set up in the United States. And all kinds of CIA money and Ford Foundation money and Rockefeller money, trickled into academia to foment this layer that was really, it was about creating an intellectual barrier against Marxism. The idea was to make sure that, that intellectuals and artists who became dissidents didn't become Marxists. That was the idea, and that's why this whole milieu was set up. So, and it was very anti-Soviet. The Soviet Union was, in their view, a very conservative society. Susan Sontag, who's one of the big thinkers of so-called cultural Marxism, she said that communism is nothing but the most successful form of fascism. She said that, and in her mind it was true because she only believed in deconstruction. This is in the new textbook, by the way. If you want to get We Are City Builders, this is all in there. It's all in that book. I have pictures and citations and all kinds of stuff. So, what they call cultural Marxism is not Marxism. It is an intellectual barrier set up to fight against Marxism that also deconstructed a lot of American conservatism. And conservatives don't like it. And conservatives tend to think everything they don't like is communist, right? And when Jordan Peterson gets up there and tries to equate, campus liberal academics with Stalin, that's ridiculous, right? That no, campus liberal academia, the ideology that was set up by campus liberal academics and CIA money funded, it was about deconstructing and trying to create a barrier against people believing in Stalin. Sidney Hook, the New York City Trotskyite professor, was hired by the CIA as part of their Congress for Cultural Freedom program. And his goal was to create a wave of, quote, democratic awakening and dismantle the Soviet Union. So there's a lot of distortion in how that's discussed, but it refers to a real thing. There was a real layer in academia of people that were influenced by Marxism and used it for deconstruction. And Susan Sontag, Adorno, I've been over it. I'm repeating myself, but I've made videos about it. I have a video. What's the deal with cultural Marxism? Because this is an important thing to understand. Google the Congress for Cultural Freedom and read what the purpose was. This whole milieu that now basically runs leftism. Leftism has been completely distorted by these people. And thank you, Andre, for the super chat. What these people believe is not Marxism. Okay? Khamenei says the U.S., we're moving toward a post-U.S. world. That's the supreme leader of Iran. And he is absolutely right. And I think he's saying that because, Iran, the USA is basically telling Iran that they need to make further concessions in order to get back into the Iran nuclear deal. Supreme leader of Iran is saying, no, the only way Iran will get back into the nuclear deal is if all the post-nuclear deal sanctions, all the new sanctions created after the nuclear deal by the Trump administration are rolled back. And I think Khamenei is justifying that to his population, saying, look, we're in a post-U.S. world, right? USA wants to cut us off and not do business with us. We'll do business with China. We'll do business with Russia. We'll do business with Venezuela. Look, we just opened a whole new supermarket in Venezuela. And, I think that's why Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, is saying that. He's basically saying that, look, we don't live, there used to be this world where if the United States cut you off, you were done, right? When North Korea, in the 1990s, North Korea was basically cut off by the United States, right? The Soviet Union fell. They couldn't trade with the Soviet Union. China was in a situation where they were being pressured by the United States to not trade as much with North Korea. And North Korea needed oil very, very badly to run their food system. But you could only buy oil in U.S. dollars. And, North Korea's food system in the 1990s, it came to a grinding halt. They didn't have gasoline for their tractors, and they couldn't grow their crops. And even though they had worked very hard to have, fields on the sides of mountains, and, in the 1990s, because they could not get petroleum in North Korea, because the only way you could get petroleum was with the petrodollar, US dollars. Millions of people starved to death in North Korea. They call it the arduous march, right? The United States basically said, North Korea, you're done. You can't trade with us and anyone who does business with us. And North Korea, as a result, millions of people died. Nowadays, that doesn't happen. Nowadays, they don't have that same ability. To just cancel countries. Now, they do wage economic warfare, and, someone asked about Cuba, and, Cuba has had huge problems because of this, and Iran, they can't get the, kind of airplane parts they want, and it's still awful when these countries are subject to sanctions, and I think that takes care of the Cuba question. It's still awful when these countries are subject to sanctions, no doubt about it. It's awful. But they don't have the same kind of ability to just cancel countries. Iraq in the 90s. The U.S. government didn't like Saddam Hussein, canceled. At least 1.2 million people died as a result of the U.S. sanctions on Iraq. They couldn't get chlorine to purify their water. Millions of deaths, right? North Korea, millions of deaths, right? Nowadays, if the USA takes a country like Cuba, like Iran, and cancels them, they don't have the ability to just kill millions of people because there's Russia, because there's Venezuela, because there's China, because there's Cuba. It's not the same way it used to be. Right, that there has been a geopolitical shift, and the Eurasian superpowers have reemerged. Russia has reawakened. And basically the rise of Vladimir Putin, and they reversed, the situation Russia was in the 90s, where in the 90s Russia was just being looted, and Putin came in, and now Russia very much it's reached, it's far above the industrial level it was at during the time of the Soviet Union. They have their own farming boom, etc. China also has built up enough strength that China is no longer so desperate for foreign investment that it goes along with a lot of things the U.S. does. In fact, China says no to the United States a lot. Things have changed. You have the rise of Bolivarianism, right, and Venezuela and Bolivia and Nicaragua, and that Cuba is not the only socialist country in South and Central America anymore. It's not the only socialist country in Latin America. So all of this has led to a situation where Khamenei is saying we live in a post-U.S. world. That yes, the USA doesn't want us back in the nuclear deal. Fine, we'll keep going. I think that's what's going on with that quote. All right. The U.S. cities want Cuban help. Yeah, well, this isn't the first time. After Hurricane Katrina, Cuba had hundreds of English-speaking doctors ready to just go up to Louisiana and help people. The Bush administration wouldn't allow them to come in. There are many U.S. cities that would love to have Cuban doctors come in and help, but the U.S. government won't allow it, right? Because it doesn't want people to like Cuba. It doesn't want people to see that Cuba has an effective medical system. Remember, we're supposed to believe what we saw on Fox News, that everyone in Cuba is starving and dying, and everyone dies as soon as they get to the hospital because evil Cuban medical care. Look, Ban Ki-moon, the UN Secretary General, said that Cuba has the best medical school in the world. There are articles from The Guardian, articles from the New York Times, articles from all kinds of very, very, very mainstream publications marveling at Cuba's low infant mortality rate, at its high life expectancy. Cuba's medical system, for a very small island, they have done amazing things. And the medical aid they send all over the world, Cuba has done a lot of very, very amazing stuff with their medical system. U.S. leaders don't want that kind of publicity for Cuba, and they don't want, there to be that kind of relationship. They don't want Americans to go to their Cuban doctor and like it, and then based on that, they don't want that. That's the situation there. Progressivism versus liberalism. The term progressive denotes historical progress. It means you believe in advancing, moving forward, right? That history is moving forward. Liberalism is an ideology that puts the individual above all else. Now, Kinky asked about it because, the term progressive, it really goes back to like around the, late 1800s, early 1900s, the muckraking journalists, Ida Tarbell and Lincoln Steffens, they started calling themselves progressives. I think Woodrow Wilson, the U.S. president, who was kind of a Bonapartist, he called himself a progressive. And the term progressive denoted historical progress. We need reforms to make society better, so we're progressive in that sense. Given the Whoa. Let me look at that super chat that just went. Given the nuclear programs in North Korea and Iran and the success of the Iron Dome, was it a mistake to oppose and cut missile defense for all those years? Okay. Alrighty. Okay. Okay. A lot. Right. Ron. Missile. Okie dokie. All right. So there you go. Cashless society. You know, I think that our leaders really do want a cashless society. They raise this over and over again. I constantly see stories they want it, but that's going to be a big change, right? To get to a totally cashless society is a big change. You know, I think our leaders would like to do that way. Basically, with a cashless society, everyone's money is in a bank. And so a banker makes money off of it. Plus, you can track people's transactions. There's a lot less off-the-grid interactions. But honestly, you know, it's going to be very difficult. They would like that. They would very much like to do that, I think. But I think there would be lower levels of capital that would resist on that. But yeah, the ultra-rich would like to move to a cashless society. That way they can track every transaction, plus they can make money about it. So there you go. What have Marxists said about liberalism? Well, I encourage you to go back and read Eugene Debs' speech, the anti-war speech from Canton, Ohio, that Eugene V. Debs went to prison for. Eugene Debs, the socialist leader, the great socialist in American history, he went to prison for giving an anti-war speech in Canton, Ohio. Go and read that speech. It is a very illiberal speech. He talks about how a socialist can look at himself with pride, you know, and go back and read that, right? And it's a very illiberal speech. And he talks about people who just live for themselves, and it's really a beautiful speech. Go back and read the Eugene V. Debs Canton, Ohio speech. And that is a speech basically urging his audience to abandon liberalism and give their life to socialism. It's very beautiful. All right. Examples of the lower levels of capital. Fracking companies. Fracking companies can't stand big oil. They cannot stand big oil. There's lower levels of capital for you. Another example of lower levels of capital. Hotel chains. There you go. What else? Betsy DeVos, right? Betsy DeVos, she's a billionaire. You know where her money comes from? It comes from Tupperware parties. Amway, the multi-level marketing scheme. She's lower levels of capital, right? And the fact that they picked her, that Trump picked her to be Secretary of Education, not some academic, you know, cultivated by the Rockefeller think tanks like the Obama administration had, but instead they picked this lower level capitalist. That was something that infuriated the ruling class, right? Yeah, there are many examples, right? Of, you know, I mean, My Pillow, that guy is lower levels of capital, right? You think he's in there with the DuPonts and the Morgan? No. Is he a millionaire? Sure. Is he a billionaire? I'm not sure he's a billionaire. I think he's a millionaire for sure, but that guy's lower levels of capital for sure. What has he got? He's got a pillow company, right? There's many examples of lower levels of capital, and that's who's behind Trump. Largely, it's lower levels of capital. All right. Liberalism and social democracy. I think the question was, does liberalism have social democracy? Does social democracy have liberalism embedded with it? And I can see that, that social democrats, in a lot of cases, they just can't break with liberalism, right? That at the end of the day, as much as they might understand that there's problems with capitalism, as much as they might be open to maybe even moving beyond capitalism, they just are not comfortable breaking with liberalism, right? You know, they heard on CNN that Fidel Castro was an evil guy. They heard on CNN that China is an evil country, and they just are not able to break with liberalism. And so that, yeah, a lot of social democrats, they're able to understand the problems of capitalism, but they just don't have the courage to say that, you know, that they're not able to make the big leap. Is there a divide between big tech and little tech? They're just not able to make the big leap. So I think that, yeah, in a lot of cases, you know, it's one thing to recognize the problems of the Western capitalist society. It's a very different thing to actually recognize that the opposition to capitalism should triumph. All right. The Great Reset. Well, look, that's an economic plan that we have seen from some of the richest to the rich, the World Bank, the IMF, Bill Gates, others. It's an economic plan, and that many have noted that it seems like the pandemic has given an opportunity to sections of the ruling class that want a great reset for climate change and a higher level of social engineering, that they have done that, that it's given them an opportunity. Does that mean the pandemic is all a big conspiracy? No. The ruling class, they say they never let a good crisis go to waste. You ever heard that before? They never let a good crisis go to waste. If you read, The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein, she talks about this. When there's a crisis, when people are panicking, that's when they swing into action to try and implement things that they've been wanting to implement for years. That's what all their think tanks do. They sit around and think of things they could do in a big crisis, right? The Patriot Act was just sitting around waiting for 9/11 to happen, right? This domestic terrorism law. You think they wrote it up right after the Capitol riot? They said, "Oh, Capitol riot, start writing." No, they had it waiting for when there was a moment when people would be ready for it. This is how they operate. And that's how all kinds of movements, even progressive movements, operate like that. They wait until the right moment and then they swing into action, right? This is just good politics, right? It can be, there's an expression, they say timing is everything in politics, right? Timing is everything in politics. That's an expression, and that's, Great Reset. Okay, they've had a lot of reforms. The ultra-rich, the World Bank, the World Business Forum has had certain reforms that they've wanted to implement for a long time. Well, something came along, gave them an opportunity. Does that mean it's all a big plot? No. So there you go. Gambling addiction. Well, look, gambling stimulates a part of your mind, right, that gives you a certain thrill. And the owners of casinos learn how to manipulate that thrill to make their own profits. That's basically what there is to it. So gambling, it's this thrill of like not knowing the result, right? And the risk kind of gives you a thrill. You might get more money, you might lose your money. It gives you a thrill, right? And people gamble in all kinds of ways, right? And life is very much a gamble, right? You take risks in life. You go into new environments. You try things you've never done before. That's part of the thrill of gambling is kind of a cheap imitation of the thrill of living, right? If you can't live, you can gamble, I guess, right? If you don't really have that exciting of a life where you're not meeting new people and taking new risks and getting into exciting situations, well, at least you can, go to the slot machine. It's a way to kind of imitate. It's like a cheap knockoff, right? Gambling is, in a lot of ways, you could argue, gambling is to life what sex is, what pornography is to sex, right? You can't actually go out and have sex with a spouse or a partner, right? Well, you can look at pornography. Well, you can't actually go out and live an exciting life full of adventure. Well, you can put money in the slot machine and see what happens, right? And that's, there's a lot of that where capitalism deprives people of the ability to experience kind of the natural joys of being a full-fledged human being. And in our alienated existence, it tries to commodify some kind of cheap knockoff of that, and basically, that's a lot of cases what gambling is, and of course, as capitalism leads people to live in a very alienated existence where they have a job they hate, they don't have human connections, they're miserable, they're lonely, they're isolated. Well, gambling addiction can kind of take the place of that. Another thing about gambling addiction, though, is that, it's just basic capitalism, right? The house always wins, they say, right? The gambling, those casinos, they make lots of money. The profit revenue for those casinos is massive. And one of the saddest things I've ever seen, every decaying city in the United States, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, I don't know if they've done this in Pittsburgh. Detroit definitely has done this. Cleveland has definitely done this. The city is dying. The factories have all closed down. They closed the steel yards of Cleveland. The steel yards closed down a long time ago. All the steel mills of Cleveland are gone. Detroit, Motor City, it's all done. The city will be decaying and dying. And then what will happen is the city's decaying and dying. And some casino company will come along and they'll say, hey, I've got a great idea. We'll save the economy by building a big, giant casino in the downtown area, right? And often, not only does the city legalize gambling in order to give a license to this city, because gambling tends to be illegal in most of the United States, not only do they pass a special permission in Detroit, in Cleveland, I've seen this, but many other cities have done this. But on top of that, the taxpayers will pay for the damn thing. The taxpayers will pay. Tax money will be used to build this casino. And and there'll be a special law, and it's all to fix the economy of the city. And what happens? Now there's a casino in the downtown area, and now a lot of poor working class people that are struggling to get by will go to the casino and lose money. And that doesn't benefit the city. The city loses money. The city gets even poorer than it was before. All this taxpayer money was wasted on the casino. And the only people it really benefits are the casino owners. That's it. It's a ripoff. And it's like further, the city is already devastated by deindustrialization. And it's like further, further punishment of an already suffering city. It's really awful. Gambling is very predatory. If it was up to me, I would, this is where I would break with social liberalism. I would outlaw gambling. I would outlaw casino gambling. I'd outlaw casinos. I'd outlaw the lottery. I don't think the government should be engaging in the lottery, right? And it's not good. If it was up to me, I would get rid of the lottery and I'd get rid of gambling. I'm sure I'm not popular there. I'm sure there's a lot of working class people who get a thrill out of playing the lottery or love to go to those casinos, but I don't think it's good for people. And I think that I guess this is where I'm illiberal. I think the state, even if people might want that, the state has an obligation to say, no, we're not going to allow you to be ripped off in that way. No, we're not going to allow someone to appeal to you that way. And it's our job to, make a better life in your communities. And yeah, I think that gambling is not a good thing, honestly. I'm just giving you my opinion. I have a low opinion of gambling. I do. And, I really do. I think that it's predatory. It rips off working class people. It's a side effect of the alienation, right? The thrill that you get from gambling is the thrill you should be getting from living an exciting life, right? It should be the thrill you get from living an exciting life, from taking new opportunities and all of that. But if you're reduced to a situation where you're alienated from your labor, and there you go. All right. Okay. So someone asked me about Iran and North Korea's nuclear programs, the success of the Iron Dome program in Israel, and should we therefore cut our missile defense? Okay, there's a lot of things wrong with this question. First of all, North Korea, do they have nuclear weapons? Yes, they do. They withdrew from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. They have nuclear weapons. Why? Because the United States has a huge amount of nuclear weapons, and it's threatened before to drop them. Remember during the Korean War, the USA threatened to drop 15 atomic bombs on North Korea and China. North Korea was facing a crisis and facing, the overthrow and a food crisis, and they withdrew from the treaty and they developed nuclear weapons. North Korea does not have nuclear weapons for the purpose of destroying the United States. They have nuclear weapons for the purpose of deterring an invasion by the United States. Iran does not have nuclear weapons, has never had nuclear weapons, and has always been 100% in compliance with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. The International Atomic Energy Agency monitors every site in Iran and makes sure that at no point are they ever in violation. Every nuclear site in Iran is monitored. Iran not only fully complied with the Non-Proliferation Treaty, it also fully complied with the nuclear deal. So Iran is not developing a missile system. Now, you talked about the Iron Dome, right? Yeah, Israel has the Iron Dome, which is their protective system. The idea is that, that if someone shot missiles at them, they would deflect them with their Iron Dome. Why isn't Iran allowed to have an Iron Dome? Every time Iran tests its missile defense system, the United States declares that to be aggression. Have you noticed that? Iran is not making a nuclear weapon, has never violated any of their rules, but every time they try to perfect their missile system to make sure that Israel can't strike them with missiles, U.S. media goes ballistic and they put more sanctions on Iran. So you've got this completely wrong in your head, right? You think that Iran and North Korea are developing nukes. Well, North Korea has nukes, Iran does not. And neither of those countries are out to get the United States. You also seem to think that the Iron Dome is okay for Israel, but every time Iran tries to perfect its nuclear defense or its missile defense system, you seem to think that that's an act of aggression. When why, if Israel can have an Iron Dome, why can't Iran have an Iron Dome? Right? And on top of that, you seem to think that the United States, like, we're under attack or something, and that these countries want to destroy us. They don't. And so there's many things wrong with that question. I don't know where that question came from, but it's like 100 miles off. There are so many wrong assumptions there. I don't know where to begin. Well, I told you. All right, is there a divide between big tech and little tech? Yes, I think so. I think little tech tends to be more libertarian. I think little tech is probably more supportive of, like, Julian Assange and people like that. So there you go. And yes, Andre points out that Israel has nukes, and that is true. Israel has a huge amount of nuclear weapons. Iran doesn't. So, yeah, there you go. I mean, that question is just way off. I mean, whoever asked that question is just off. I mean, they just don't understand the circumstances. With all due respect, good sir, I think you just don't get it. You just don't get it there, sir. Right? And that, you just don't get it. That's okay. We're all learning things, but there you go. You just don't get it. Anything else, folks, before we call it a night here? Anything else before we call it a night? Anything else anyone wants to ask me before we go here tonight? Anything that is on people's minds? Any other super chat questions? Speak now or hold your question until the next time I'm on here. Thank you for the informative chat, says Mr. Crab. Well, you're welcome, Mr. Crab. Anything else people want to hear about? Anything else? The clock is ticking. My wife would love for me to get home. Short talk tonight. Yeah, it was short. The news cycle will pick up. I'll have more to talk about. But there you go. I'll have more to talk about soon. Thank you. Oh, I'm really glad. All righty. How can we get more involved? Well, shoot me an email. I'll plug you into the Center for Political Innovation. You can get your hands on the new manual, the educational manual of the CPI. So there you go. All right, folks. I think we're going to call it a night. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. I do not know enough about little tech to continue speaking about it, good sir. But thank you for super chatting that question. I will have to do some research. I'm learning a lot about tech right now and artificial intelligence and all kinds of things right now as I prepare to write the Silicon Valley book. So I will have to do more research on that. Thank you for asking the question. Have a good night, folks.